We're at time, and I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, the last time I'm going to say that, are there any changes to the final agenda?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. There are no changes to this morning's agenda.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move to the first item on the regular agenda, item 301, case 19E0122, which is the petition of Ravenswood Development presented by Jay Goodman, Assistant Counsel. Jeremy Rosenthal, Utility Analyst 3, is available for questions. Jay, please begin.
Thank you, Chair Rhodes, and good morning, Commissioners. This item pertains to the request of Ravenswood Development, LLC, for a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, or CPCN, pursuant to Public Service Law, Section 68, to construct and operate an energy storage facility in Queens, New York. Ravenswood Development also requests that its ownership and operation of the facility be subject to a lightened rate-making regulatory regime. The proposed storage facility is a battery-based system that would be constructed in 3 phases with a total potential storage capacity of up to 316 megawatts. Phase 1 would be 129 megawatts and is anticipated to commence operations in March 2021. Ravenswood Development proposes to construct the facility on a portion of the 27-acre Ravenswood Generating Station that is owned by an affiliated company, Helix Ravenswood, and which currently hosts numerous active and inactive electric generation facilities. 16 fossil peaking units owned by Helix Ravenswood would be demolished during facility construction. Construction also would include a new gas-insulated substation within the Ravenswood Generating Station that would be owned and operated by Consolidated Edison Company of New York. Importantly, Ravenswood Development and not Con Edison would bear all substation costs. The energy storage facility would participate in the wholesale energy, capacity, and ancillary services markets administered by the New York Independent System Operator, or NYSO. The facility would withdraw energy from the bulk system and store it for later injection back to the system, including during periods of peak electric demand. Public Service Law Section 68 requires an electric corporation to obtain a CPCN before it constructs electric plant such as the energy storage facility. The Commission may grant a CPCN after due hearing and finding that the project is necessary and convenient for the public service and is in the public interest. CPCN applications also must be supported with evidence that the company is economically viable, can finance construction and operation and improvements, will be able to provide safe, adequate, and reliable service, has obtained all necessary municipal consents, and has provided a certified copy of its charter. As detailed in the proposed item, Ravenswood Development has satisfied each of these requirements. I also note that the proposed storage facility would yield substantial public benefits by providing a clean source of peak capacity in New York City and supporting system reliability. It is recommended, therefore, that the Commission grant a CPCN with appropriate conditions. Department of Public Service staff conducted a review under SECRA of potential environmental impacts associated with the project and found that all associated construction, demolition, and operation activities would not have a significant adverse environmental impact on visual, water, or cultural resources or potential environmental justice areas. These and related findings are detailed in the proposed item before you, which recommends finding that the project would not result in significant adverse environmental impacts. Finally, Commission precedent has established a lightened rate-making regulatory regime for electric service providers that participate in competitive wholesale markets and do not present a risk of market power or other potential harm to captive ratepayers. Ravenswood Development demonstrated that its ownership and operation of a merchant energy storage facility would not create or enhance the potential for the exercise of market power by Ravenswood Development or its affiliates. The company does not serve captive ratepayers, and it will assume all financial risk associated with the development, operation, and maintenance of the proposed facility. The proposed item thus recommends that Ravenswood Development be granted a lightened rate-making regulatory regime that is comparable to the regulatory treatment afforded to other similarly situated wholesale market participants. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Jay. I see this as a good outcome and as a good demonstration that energy storage as a technology and as a commercial proposition is ready to play a viable and critical part in transforming our energy system to one that's clean, affordable, and reliable. I'm going to support this item. Commissioner Berman.
Thanks. First of all, I wanted to thank the two of you. I know that you've done a lot of due diligence in this, and it's clear that you've taken a lot of time in focusing on this. This is the second CPCN in the last several months where it doesn't fit the normal processes, which is not a negative. It's just recognizing that some of our regulations, last time it was Section 70, this time it's Section 68, we have to take a very close look, and it's not necessarily the standard way we've been doing it before. So to the extent that we are also looking at these going forward and recognizing some of them that are uniquely situated different than they were, we should also carefully monitor that and what that means from an application of Section 68 and Section 70, so that if there are nuances that we need to be mindful of or policy decisions that we need to be mindful of to give direction on what we're looking at, I think it's really helpful that we do so. I think that both last time with the Transco matter and this time, I think we take great care to be focused on the due diligence that's needed for this being different from others as well, and it still meets those tests. I am very happy to see the pairing of different fuels and looking at doing it in a cleaner way, and the transition of what that means. Here there's going to be 3 different phases. Each phase will have other sort of next steps that may require some regulatory oversight or input, whether it's here or at FERC or other agencies that may come to. So I am mindful that this CPCN and what we're doing is limited in nature to the framework under Section 68 as well. I do also want to recognize that to the extent that this is now involving the wholesale market and energy storage, we also need to be mindful of what we're doing at the state level and the impact on decisions at FERC. Today they're going to be their meeting, and they're deciding the compliance issues on energy storage as well. So to the extent that we need to make sure that we're aligning and taking that into consideration, I think is very important. I do want to just note, and I think it's important, at least where I sit, to note that this item references a decision that the Article 10 board made. Actually, it was the chair, then Chair Zibelman of the Article 10 board made a declaratory ruling, I believe. So one commissioner order for the Article 10 board under the relevant guidelines that allowed her to do that. And the Article 10 board at that time was looking at case 13F0287 AES, and this was back in January 24, 2014, when it stated that the Article 10 didn't extend to standalone battery storage facilities that were not associated with development of new electric generating facilities. And then this item caused concern in terms of, did that section did that decision for another case, did that now apply as well to this case? Did they need to go to the Article 10 board or not? So a declaratory ruling petition was put forward to the Article 10 board asking if they needed Article 10 review. I do agree with the decision that it did not, and that that policy decision that the chair of the Article 10 board made, could be applied, and that folks didn't need to come back each and every time as long as it met the framework of what that stood for. So it was very specific on what it was. It's referenced here, and so I think it's important for me to just put a note there in that I do want to be mindful of the fact that as we go forward with more Article 10 applications, and as we go forward with more things that impact energy, whether it's energy storage or others, that to the extent that we also need to engage with the Commission and other relevant folks on whether or not it's the Article 10 board or whether it's the Commission, or whether somehow there needs to be better alignment among us to make sure that we're giving clear signals as well. And so it's not for me to necessarily say, since the Article 10 board made this policy decision, therefore I must follow it. What I would say is I do think that from a regulatory certainty perspective, it makes sense. And also from my own substantive review, I do agree with that decision. But I am mindful that those clear regulatory signals and engagement with the PSC may need to be done. I also don't want to see where we decided, and in this case, it was appropriate from the counsel to the Article 10 board, who also is counsel to the PSC. But for this case, I wouldn't have tracked it as carefully. So I just want to flag that those policy decisions really should be important for us to engage in before decisions are made, and make sure that we're all in alignment. So that's my 2 cents from that. But again, I agree with the decision. I do think, for me, I'm very comfortable voting yes on this item. This is really comes out of last December, where the Commission issued its order establishing an energy storage goal and deployment policy. And it adopts many of the recommendations contained in the New York State Energy Storage Roadmap. And the storage order provided a strategy to encourage the deployment of energy storage by certain timeframes. Here, the Commission's issuance of this CPCN and the granting of lightened rate-making regulation for the proposed Ravenwoods development energy storage does pair nicely with that energy storage, the energy storage goals, and helps in moving that forward. And therefore, it is a necessary step to putting in place those energy storage policy goals. So there's going to be a lot more discussion on how that gets done, but I do think that this is aligned with that, and so I support it. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see no significant negative impacts. I believe it's a reasonable and balanced approach that we've been presented with from the department, and I'll be happy to support it.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards.
Good morning. I see that it's zoned industrial and heavy manufacturing. If possible, could you just send me an aerial map so I could see the closest residential area?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we'll provide you the information that we have.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard.
Well, I'm personally very pleased with this development and how it sets the stage for further large-scale storage, energy storage, particularly in the downstate region. I understand that the applications for additional storage have resulting from the Commission's actions have been quite robust, and that is a great view into the future and how this technology will fit in. And this particular order and our experience here gives me really great confidence that certainly our near-term goals are more than achievable and should proceed at pace. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you. With that, I'll proceed to call for a vote. My own vote is in favor of the recommendation to issue a certificate of public convenience and necessity with conditions and to grant a lightened rate-making regulatory regime as discussed. Commissioner Berman?
Yes.
Commissioner Lisi?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. Thank you, Jay and Jeremy. So we'll now move to the second item for discussion, which is the staff's report, which is case 19M0382, which is the staff's report on New York State gas and electric supply readiness for the 2019-2020 winter. Presented by Tammy Mitchell, Director, Office of Electric, Gas, and Water, John Sano, Utility Supervisor, Gas Rates and Supply, Vijay Paran, Utility Supervisor, Bulk Electric Systems, Paul Darmetko, Utility Engineering Specialist 3, Electric Rates and Tariffs, and Anna Senatori, Utility Consumer Program Specialist. Tammy, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Today's staff will be briefing you on the results of our review of the readiness of the state's natural gas and electric utilities for this coming winter. First, John Sano will brief you on the readiness of the state's natural gas utilities and then provide you with a projection of the average natural gas bills for the coming winter. Vijay Paran will update you on the readiness of the bulk electric system, followed by Paul Darmetko, who will discuss the projections for electricity prices for the coming winter. And Anna Senatori will conclude the panel with a discussion of the outreach efforts related to winter bills and safety. Overall, based on normal winter weather, both natural gas and electric prices are expected to be lower this winter than last. However, a recent development on the natural gas pipeline system, which John Sano will discuss shortly, could impact deliveries to downstate New York and will require local distribution companies to take proactive steps to mitigate potential reliability concerns. Staff is closely monitoring this situation and the actions of the LDCs to mitigate potential impacts. I will now turn it over to John Sano to discuss the natural gas utilities' capacity and supply projections and forecast gas prices.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Tammy. Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. I am John Sano, and I serve as a Utility Supervisor in the Gas Rates and Supplies section of the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water. I will brief you on the results of our annual review into the readiness of the state's natural gas utilities for the coming winter. Overall, the New York gas utilities are taking actions to prepare for the coming winter despite some challenges. Next slide, please. The state's gas utilities are also called local distribution companies, or LDCs. Based upon our review and representations of the LDCs regarding natural gas supply readiness for the upcoming winter season, staff concludes that the LDCs serving New York State are in the process of contracting for adequate natural gas supply, delivery capacity, and storage inventory to satisfy current firm customer demands under designed winter conditions for this winter. This includes additional new contracts designed to replace current volumes lost due to a concern with the Enbridge pipelines, which I will discuss in more detail. Staff continues to coordinate with oil industry representatives and the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, to ensure that customers have access to adequate supplies of winter heating fuels. Next slide, please. Each utility has a unique mix of assets, including pipeline capacity, storage, and liquefied natural gas, used to serve a unique mix of customers. Interruptible customers are those that have the ability to stop using natural gas during periods of high demand, play an important role in reducing the amount of pipeline capacity needed to serve winter load. Recent filings made by LDCs in rate cases focus on the use of demand response and non-pipe alternatives, including energy efficiency, to meet growing demand, especially in areas where local governments seek to phase out dirtier heating fuels such as fuel oil and propane. We continue to monitor some areas of the state where demand is growing at a faster pace and where the existing distribution system is becoming constrained, including New York City, Long Island, Westchester, as well as the Capital District. And we are investigating whether certain utilities should have been more aggressive in its pursuit of alternate supplies in order to provide a greater cushion this winter. The LDCs purchase. Please go back to the previous slide. The LDCs purchase gas to supply their customers' winter needs in 3 ways, and this is represented by the pie chart on this slide. The first way is by filling their natural gas storage facilities during the summer when demand is low. The second way is by hedging, which acts like an insurance policy to guarantee the volatility of the gas price will not be too high. The third way is by purchasing at the prevailing market price, which fluctuates with market forces and is called flowing gas. The price of storage gas, flowing gas, and hedge gas are all forecasted to be lower than last year. The price of natural gas, though, is influenced by many factors. Weather is chief among these. Next slide, please. We expect the average residential customer's winter heating bill to be about $760 for this winter, assuming normal weather, but this varies by utility. This is lower than last winter due to the lower gas commodity prices we just discussed. Next slide. Okay, unlike most years, we are starting this winter season with a pipeline force majeure situation that could impact natural gas reliability. Last month, utilities were informed by Enbridge, the owner of the Texas Eastern and Algonquin pipelines, that there would be pressure reductions this winter on both pipelines. These reductions are the result of the need for integrity verification testing as part of a corrective action order from the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, in response to 4 incidents within a 12-month period on Enbridge pipes, and also an investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, into the most recent incident which occurred in Kentucky on August 1st of this year. The corrective action order forces pressure reductions on parts of Enbridge's system up to 20% of normal operating conditions. The capacity reductions that result from this action will impact deliveries into the downstate Goethals and South Manhattan gate stations. This creates an immediate reliability challenge in the downstate New York region and is an example of how a single point of failure on the interstate pipeline system can impact operations in New York. Staff will be watching the Enbridge situation closely to ensure that appropriate corrective action is taken by the LDCs. Whether the downstate LDCs in particular took appropriate contingency actions to reduce the impacts of this situation is the subject of an ongoing investigation by staff. Next slide, please. In conclusion, our review indicates that the LDCs serving New York are in the process of securing adequate contracts for supplies of natural gas to meet expected firm customer requirements this winter. However, staff will continue to monitor the Enbridge situation as well as our traditional monitoring of supply, prices, and interruptible customer compliance throughout the winter and report any situations that require Commission action. Staff will also work with the LDCs and interested communities to find innovative solutions to the challenges represented by increased demand for natural gas. This concludes my portion of the presentation, and I'll be happy to take questions after the panel has finished. I will now turn the presentation over to Vijay. Vijay, next slide, please.
Thank you, John. Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. My name is Vijay Puran, and I'm a utility supervisor in the department's bulk electric system section. I'm here today to brief you on staff's review of the bulk electric system's preparedness for the upcoming 2019-2020 winter period. At the outset, I would like to say that based upon our review, we conclude that the bulk electric system is prepared to reliably meet the state's upcoming winter's electric demands. Next slide, please. This chart shows the summer and winter historic coincident peak since year 2000. It also shows that New York State is a summer peaking state and therefore has to have sufficient available capability to meet loads well above those typically experienced during the winter. Last winter's actual electric peak load was 24,728 megawatts. This was 1,010 megawatt lower than the all-time winter peak of 25,738 megawatt, which occurred in a prolonged cold spell during the 2013-2014 winter, which we refer to as the polar vortex. The electric peak forecast for the coming winter period is 24,123 megawatts. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes the resources expected to be available to New York during the winter. These resources include generation, demand response resources called special case resources, and purchases from outside of New York State. These resources are offset by expected unavailability or outage of generation resources. The New York ISO expects to have 37,643 megawatts in net capacity resources available during the winter to serve the forecasted winter peak load of 24,123 megawatts. Once operating reserves, which are resources available to meet sudden system contingencies, are accounted for, there remains a capacity margin of 10,900 megawatts. In short, we have sufficient capability to serve the forecasted load during the upcoming winter. Next slide, please. As part of staff's winter assessment, we reached out to major generating facility owners in Southeast New York who owns about 12,000 megawatts of dual fuel generation capability. The dual fuel capability enables generators to burn either natural gas or oil depending on the situation, which can be driven by economics or unavailability of one of the fuel. We found that these owners are continuing to implement lessons learned during the polar vortex winter of 2013-2014, including having increased pre-winter on-site fuel reserves, having formed contracts with fuel oil suppliers, conducting more aggressive replenishment plans, and having more proactive pre-winter maintenance and facilities preparations. Next slide, please. A winter coordination protocol is in place to facilitate communication between state agencies and the New York ISO in circumstances where fuel supply for generating facilities may be at risk, or if a generator owner needs a fuel specification waiver from the DEC to maintain reliability. The state agencies involved are the DPS, DEC, NYSERDA, and DOT. Staff also met with the New York ISO and discussed its procedures and protocols for the winter period. In recent years, the New York ISO has instituted various changes to help ensure electric reliability during periods of tight natural gas supply, including closely monitoring generator fuel levels and replenishments. In addition, the New York ISO has improved communications with interstate pipelines, local gas distribution companies, and neighboring ISOs during periods of tight electric operating conditions. That concludes my presentation. I'll now turn it over to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. Good morning, Chairman Rhodes. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Paul Darmetko, and I'm a Utility Engineering Specialist in the Electric Rates and Tariff section. And this morning I'll be providing you with some information on how the utilities have performed at reducing the electric supply price volatility for their full-service residential customers. I'll talk a little bit about the statewide portfolio that the utilities have in place this winter. And I'll also provide you with an estimate of what we expect the statewide full-service residential customer supply rate may look like this year compared to the last few years if we experience normal weather. Next slide. This graph shows the results of the electric utility supply price volatility mitigation efforts since December of 2008. It compares the average New York ISO day-ahead electric market price volatility, the red line, with the volatility of the utility's residential electric supply portfolios, the blue line. Each point represents the price volatility over a 12-month period as measured by the coefficient of variation. The high point that you see on the graph represents the volatility that was experienced due to the 2014 polar vortex, which resulted in increased market prices and increased price volatility. Even though customers benefited from the hedges that the utilities had in place, the bill impacts that customers experienced were very high. As a result of lessons learned from the polar vortex, the utilities modified certain aspects of their hedging programs. These changes included increasing the fixed price hedge level for their residential supply customers during the winter months from about 55% to about 70% on a statewide average basis, as well as certain utilities maintaining multiple portfolios to better hedge their customers located in different regions of their service territories. As you can see, the utilities have continued to perform well at reducing the portfolio volatility compared to market. Similar to the last few years, this winter the utilities have maintained, on average, a 70% hedge level to mitigate market price volatility if it occurs. Next slide. This next slide compares the last few years of the statewide average full-service residential supply price to what we expect the price to be this winter season, if we experience normal weather. As you can see, at this point going into the winter, we expect that on a statewide average basis, the full-service residential commodity price will be about the same, if not slightly lower than the last 4 years. However, if the weather does turn cold, or if other system conditions occur that will cause the market price of electricity to spike, the utilities have taken steps to protect their full-service residential customers through their volatility management programs. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll now turn it over to Anna.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, Chairman Rhodes. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Anna Senatore. I'm a manager in the Department of Consumer. Can you hear me? I'm a manager in the Consumer Outreach and Education section. This report describes the outreach.
Anna, I think you need to speak closer or speak up. Is that correct, Adam? Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me okay now?
I could hear you before, but I'm looking in the back rows. Are we good? Yep, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Anna Senatore, and I'm a manager in the Department of Consumer Outreach and Education section. This report describes the outreach efforts being implemented by the department staff and New York State Energy Utilities to provide customers with information to help them manage their energy usage and related bills for the 2019-2020 winter season. Next slide, please. Both the department and the utilities will promote messages regarding the expected pricing and the utilities' actions to reduce price volatility. Messages will focus on options to manage winter bills, including bill payment programs such as budget billing and deferred payment agreements, and financial assistance programs such as the Home Energy Assistance Program. Next slide. Oh, no. I'm sorry. Go back one. Customers will also be encouraged to take simple, affordable measures to reduce energy use and become more energy efficient, which may help to lower their energy bills. Other messages will focus on resources available to assist consumers faced with heat-related energy emergencies, safety information regarding natural gas, electricity, and carbon monoxide, and storm preparation. Next slide, please. The department's winter outreach program uses a variety of methods to reach consumers, such as developing and distributing publications which are available in English and Spanish, and some of which may be available in other languages, including Chinese, Haitian Creole, Bengali, Korean, and Russian. We use the department's websites, email campaigns, and our call center staff to get our messages out to utility customers. To further increase our efforts to reach New York State consumers, staff engages in grassroots outreach, which includes presentations to community groups, exhibits at public events, such as senior expos and home shows. We partner with organizations and communities across the state, such as social service providers, civic, senior, business, and faith groups. We invite our network of nearly 6,000 consumer leaders to partner with us in educating consumers about their winter energy costs. We provide our materials free of charge and encourage our partners to distribute them to their constituents. Last year, we provided over 147,000 publications to local governments, libraries, and consumer groups, a 31% increase compared to 2017. Factors contributing to the increase include staff's enhanced outreach efforts, which combine the use of digital tools to track event participation, and our more robust consumer leader list. In addition to the department's outreach program, the utilities implement outreach plans which include customer information about mitigating price volatility, storm preparation measures, safety, energy efficiency tips, rebates and incentive programs, and information on heating assistance programs. Some utilities are also taking advantage of smart meter technology to alert customers about their energy usage. As more sophisticated technology becomes available and customers have access to a breakdown of their usage data, they will also be able to take energy-saving actions to reduce their bills. The utilities are using a variety of delivery vehicles to reach their respective customers, including email campaigns, text alerts, news releases, radio, paid media ads, bill inserts and bill envelope messages, newsletters, on-hold telephone messages, website features, and social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The utilities also work with municipal and elected officials and partner with human service organizations and community groups. Finally, the utilities provide training to their consumer advocates and call center staff on winter messaging and customer assistance. In conclusion, the Office of Consumer Services Winter Energy Outreach and Education Program is designed to ensure that New York State utility customers have access to information about programs that will help them manage their winter energy bills and educate them on how to be more energy efficient. Staff will continue to monitor the need for additional outreach and education efforts, such as developing a plan in response to the Enbridge concerns. We will work with the utilities to make modifications as needed throughout the heating season. That concludes my portion of this presentation. I will now return our presentation back to John. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Chairman Rhodes and Commissioners, this concludes our presentation. We are now available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, John, VJ, Paul, Anna. Thanks for the news, which is clearly good news on the price outlooks. And thank you also for the attentive vigilance and oversight in managing through this winter supplies. And also thank you for the good readiness to support customers with information and answer. I don't have further questions, but I suspect my colleague commissioners might. So with that, let me turn to Commissioner Berman first.
I'm actually going to let others go first so that I don't hog it, and some of them may have some more questions to me. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisi.
No questions. I just would make this comment noted earlier in the report. The bullet item that said storage and replacement of fuel oil is critical, and that strikes a blow. So I hope that we'll have a report sometime in the near future when that line will be eliminated largely, or at least completely maybe. That's my only comment on the report. It's a good report. Good news, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
I have a few questions. So on slide 4, the talk point said that the LDCs are in the process of contracting for adequate natural gas supply. Do you know when those contracts are expected to be finalized?
There are several that are already finalized, Commissioner, but in order to make sure that we have absolute reliability for the winter, we have to have what's referred to as firm primary point capacity into one of the city gates on the New York facility system. And both utilities have gone out for a second run of proposals to find what they're still missing, because they did not get 100% of what they needed. So right now, I'll tell you, they have like 3/4 of what they were looking for, and the last quarter is out for another round of requests for proposals. I'm hoping that we'll have them by the end of this month, beginning of November. But it's possible we could come up short, and they are looking at other possibilities, additional demand response, things that can be done on a short-term rather than long-term basis, and other issues, and that's what we're currently working on with them.
Thank you. On slide 5, the pie chart, the 2019-2020 winter supply portfolio.
Yes.
Do you know how this compares to last year?
This has been very close the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
It's almost identical. I mean, we see a 1 to 2% maybe shift around. It's been that way for actually since, I'm saying 5 years, but it started turning towards this where you had more flowing gas than storage and hedge because of the new production zone in the Northeast that generated supplies very close to our home base here in New York, where previously we were getting all of our gas from Canada and from the Gulf Coast, and we tended to hedge a lot more back then. Volatility has been very low for the last 5 years, and it started turning that way in the last 10.
Thank you. And on page 18, is there a list of what we're going to be pushing out versus what the utilities are going to be pushing out and a timeline?
Yes, we do have a Yes, we do have a list of the materials we will be sending out to customers, or not customers, but we have what we call a sales sheet with the different publications that we have available. And our schedule is to begin our outreach as soon as the winter rules initiate.
So how many times do we touch customers on these items?
My intention is to send out an email campaign 3 times. Beginning with probably the beginning of November, mid-November, and then again towards the end.
Is there a percentage breakout of what's bill management versus energy efficiency and safety? Is it pretty much divided?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. What are some of the things you think that is missing? Or what could we do? Let me ask it a different way. Is there anything that we could do more of in terms of touches to customers, and what topics? Like, are we doing enough safety information? Should we be doing more energy efficiency? Like, are you designing it yourself?
No, I'm not.
Okay,
but
so if you
I
could-
do work with a team of people that develop these materials, and we're constantly looking at the materials on an annual basis, actually on a semi-annual basis, to see if we can make improvements. We do that just before the winter outreach campaign begins to ensure that the information is current, and if there's any additional information that's necessary, we either create new materials or we work with staff to see what other information we can provide consumers.
Okay, so you're flexible then.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank
Just
you.
on that, would you like to have a better understanding of that work?
You know I do.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So then, because we're an equal opportunity commission, Anna, can you prepare, a bring up to speed session with all of the commissioners that are interested?
Sure, absolutely. I'd
Thank
be
you.
happy to.
That'd be great. You did offer to talk to me too, so I appreciate that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Howard?
We have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. First, I want to understand, we've had one incident with an interstate pipeline that has resulted in serious capacity loss. What would the potential be if a second incident occurs during the same period?
Well, the action taken by the federal government was because there were 4 incidents with this company over 12 months, so it wasn't just the last one. But the last one that occurred in August is the one that developed. The purpose of the pressure reductions and the integrity verification work is to ensure that another one doesn't happen. And I couldn't sit here right now and come up with a probability of, is it possible? It's always possible.
But it's less about the possibility, it's just what would the potential effect be of losing capacity on a parallel or greater loss on this system?
Depending on the weather situation at the time we lost it, it could be very bad, and we could have to go into our existing tariffs for curtailment of firm customers. That's the end result we're trying to avoid at all cost. And
But those issues outside the state of New York and the jurisdiction of Fed are largely outside of our control, or wholly outside our control.
what we're talking about right now is outside of New York and totally out of our control. It's in control of the federal government.
Thanks. The next question I have is, in the event of a severe weather condition, how long do the utilities have to react to that short-term change in weather?
All the utilities gas control operations, not just the ones down in downstate, operate on anywhere from a 5 to 10 day weather cycle. Of course, the 5-day cycle is the most serious one and the one they're watching the most closely. So they are up to 5 days ahead making preparations, preparing. If the weather starts to get down, especially in New York City, below 20 and 15, towards 15 degrees, they start notifying their interruptible customers that it's getting cold, be ready to come off because you have to by tariff as a demand response program. And we need to start moving forward to make sure everything is put in place. At the same time, they'll be activating, especially Con Ed and National Grid, they start activating to make sure their liquefied natural gas plants are ready to come on and ready to run as peaking units, and they notify their peaking contract customers that they're ready to take a value. So it's usually a 5-day cycle, but they are looking at least 10 days ahead, too, for weather patterns to see if they have to prepare for something.
This last thing has to do with both our consumer outreach and a question of my understanding is voluntary reductions by customers under these circumstances are rare to have any real meaningful impact, and I would hope that we could develop programs to understand that when we do hit these supply crises, that customers at all levels know that we're all in the same boat and they can do things themselves to help voluntarily reduce load. The last thing I'd like to say is that I am, and I will hear me say this probably throughout my tenure here, I am always concerned about the vagaries of HEAP in the federal government and what we can expect on an ongoing basis. It's nearly impossible for families to plan going ahead, not knowing exactly what benefit may accrue on any given year. And as for this year, I would hope that the federal government would release funds as quickly as possible so we can get these programs underway. The last comment I would have to make, I would really urge staff to conclude its work on the ongoing supply issues as quickly as possible, because the sooner we get these underlying facts out, I think we will be well served, and particularly in regard to the Enbridge situation, which throws a considerable wrinkle in an already difficult situation. So that's my ask.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman?
Thank you. And picking up on the HEAP issues, it is important for us to be aware of the application timelines and get that information out, not only for basic HEAP, but when the emergency HEAP funding and application process is available. It's always very important that we engage on this issue, and I do echo Commissioner Howard's concerns on the HEAP funding and what we can do. It's very important. I do think that we also need to be mindful with our consumer outreach that when folks are being asked to curtail, go off, demand response, for those who don't have heat, the pamphlets telling them how they can be more energy efficient and budget billing and other things falls very flat and we need to be very mindful of true engagement and understanding ahead of time the folks that we're reaching out to and the folks that the utilities are reaching out to. Because as much as we are pushing some of that, which are good things, it can be something that doesn't resonate well. So last year, I did raise that I had voiced concerns about preparedness for winter. And I talked about how we had in 2014 taken a deeper dive looking at stress tests and scenarios in cold winter. In April of 2018, I believe, was one of the coldest Aprils on record in New York. Was it 2018? And we do need to really be mindful and be prepared for those extreme days in normal winters, and also be prepared for those winters that aren't normal. It's fairly simple and at the same time extremely complicated in preparing and being focused on the reliability and the resiliency of the grid. It has major consequences if we are not. And so one of the challenges is looking at, as we prepare for each season, then the longer term projections, because that is something that we need to keep in mind. And I have been a broken record on my concerns that we are not necessarily making some of the decisions we need to make, or other agencies may not be making the decisions that they need to make sure that we are making proper long-term decisions and being prepared. To the extent that things are out of our control, they're out of our control. We need to be mindful of them. But to the extent that things are in our control and we choose not to do something, is very troubling to me. Every year there are problems with upstream pipelines, and the LDCs and us, the LDCs take it into account in their planning. We take it into account in what we're doing. And it's really a question on how many negative events are we all prepared for, and what is that forecasting. And we should be looking at, when we're forecasting, some number of potential negative events and planning ahead of time, ahead of the season, in what that potential is, and making sure that we are set, because this single failure does have consequences. Other failures will have significant safety and reliability consequences, and we need to be mindful of that. And it's not just about, for me, about telling the utilities that they are now responsible and to work with us in being prepared, because we know, as we sit here today, as we sat here last, or as I sat here last year, that we needed to do something from a longer term planning process on both the gas and the electric side. And so it is very, very, very concerning to me that there is not a louder cry for doing what we need to do with new infrastructure and to make sure that we are prepared. And we're going to own that. And I need to be very clear that I am as concerned, even more so, than I was last year. Going through the different slides, I do have a couple of questions. I will state that, Tammy, you started off talking that you were briefing us on the results of our investigation into the readiness of the state's natural gas and electric utilities for the coming winter. And you used the word investigation. And I would push back a little bit because I think that there are several investigations or one investigation that's gotten elongated. But this, what we're doing, this here is really what's done every year annually, which is that we are engaging in looking at the readiness of our state's natural gas and electric utilities for the coming winter, and that it is not termed, the term investigation, I think, may be a little bit too strong, except to the extent that we are telling the utilities they better be prepared. And what that means is something that I'm not necessarily so clear on. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think I tried to change that word to review for this winter because there is a distinction. This is our annual review of the short-term system conditions for this winter as opposed to, as you say, a longer-term investigation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So, and then on slide 3, thank you. There you go. You made some comments at this time on, John, on the overall that the New York gas utilities are taking action to prepare for the coming winter despite some challenges. Like what?
Well, I think we already discussed the fact that both companies, both grid companies and Con Edison are out trying to get additional supplies to replace. And this is not that different from what they had to do 3 years ago when there was another pipeline problem in the middle of Pennsylvania. But that one was a little easier to acquire supplies in because that was just a pipe feeding the pipes that come into the city. These are actually the pipes that come into the city now that are being impacted, so it's a little more difficult to go get those. So they're actually doing the same thing they tried to do, they actually did a few years ago. In addition to that, what I wanted to do was, and I think you brought up about because I think your comments about the stress testing are very important, and one of the things I wanted to do is just mention exactly what the training is going on with the gas control operations in case a problem exists. Because right now we're talking about the potential and the possible. We're not talking about something that's probable at this point in time. So it's a concern. And I'm trying not to overly alarm people, but we want people to be aware. Both gas control operations managing the New York facility system for the entire downstate area annually update their contingency plans to reflect any changes to the systems they operate. And this includes making sure they know what to do in the event of a loss of supply of any one facility that they have. And they have step-by-step instructions that are needed to help all three of the actual service territories for the loss of supply or an asset to make sure they can all work together to try to avoid having a loss of pressure at any localized part of the system. This May, even before they knew about the Enbridge problem, they have a Metropolitan Gas System Operator Seminar, and all three service territories get together and they run through a tabletop exercise of multiple scenarios on what happens and what we can do, and they actually test different possibilities and contingencies. As recently as earlier this month, on the 7th of October, representatives of the company attended the Northeast Gas Association Gas Control Committee meetings where they actually again went through more tabletop exercises, this time knowing about the Enbridge situation, all the Northeast, because New England's affected by this too through the Algonquin pipeline. They all work together to try to run tabletop exercises on what to do with different types of problems that could develop and what kind of contingencies. So they're doing this training. In addition, still to come in the beginning of November, both the gas control operations and the gas supply operations of National Grid and Con Ed are going to be together for another pre-winter meeting to prepare for this winter, and they again are going to do more tabletop exercises specifically on how the Enbridge problem can impact the New York facility system. So that's still to come, and they're still planning that. By then, They should know exactly whether they've been able to replace all the supplies they needed, and if not, what they need to do about it, and they're going to have plans on how to enact it. So I wanted to make sure you knew exactly what they were doing along those lines.
Yeah,
All right.
that's very
And you brought up one thing about voluntary curtailment, because that's after interruptions, if you get to a situation, that's the first. I want to make sure everybody knows it was New Year's Day, 2018. We had a situation with National Fuel Gas where they lost a compressor in Pennsylvania that not only stopped a certain amount of flow on the flowing gas, but it also prohibited them from getting maximum release out of the storage fields. They actually called for a voluntary curtailment of non-core customers, meaning non-human needs customers. And the fact that it was New Year's Day and the fact that they asked for the voluntary curtailment did work, and it did get them to the day. Now, that was only a 12 to 16-hour interruption, and it's possible something like this could be longer than that, but I just wanted to make sure people know that those situations can work when they're needed. And we do have specific instances every year where we lose a compressor for a certain amount of time or problems like that occur, and the gas control operations are ready to handle that.
Okay. I think that's really important, and I appreciate you sharing that publicly. And I know we've continued to talk about these issues and the importance of them. On slide 4, you talked here about current firm customer demands, and doesn't match up, but you did. Under design winter conditions for this winter. You talked about the LDCs serving New York State and the process of contracting and current firm. So to the extent that we also need to be very clear from an education and outreach perspective on the potential for curtailments, because I do think that to the extent that we are continuing, LDCs are continuing to sign up firm customers, that vastly increases the chance currently that they're going to need to be curtailed. Is that correct?
We are talking primarily about what's there right now and what is planned already to come on for areas where they're still adding customers. That is set for this winter, yes.
Okay.
We're not talking about anything in any of the other areas where there's issues regarding whether they're adding customers or not.
Okay, but it could be a potential problem.
I don't see the addition of a few extra people, customers that we know of that are coming on this winter to be any more of a problem than we already have with Enbridge. I don't think that addition of those customers is causing any more of an additional problem than we already have with Enbridge.
Okay, that's good to know. And then going forward from a long-term perspective, if we're forecasting out more firm customers, does that present challenges?
I think that's more of a question for some of the staff investigations we're doing.
Okay.
And some of them I don't think we're at the point in time where we are ready to be talking publicly about them.
Okay, but it is something that you're looking at?
It's something that we're looking at in that
Okay.
realm.
That's fair, thank you. To the extent that we're also working with the oil industry representatives and the propane folks, it's really, really important. And ensuring that there's access to adequate supplies of winter heating fuels. I think it needs to really be stated that, we will have an increase likely in the need for switching interruptible customers off of gas onto oil. Is that correct?
We actually had our first pre-winter discussion with the oil dealers last week.
Okay, all right. I think it was 2016, 2017 when we did ask folks to switch off of gas and interruptible customers. Can you hear me in the back? Because I see some people. No? Sorry. Hold on, let me just. Just let me get situated. Thanks. So to the extent that, is that better? To the extent that sorry. To the extent that we are switching customers, interruptible customers, off of gas and they're moving then to oil, the oil needs to be there. 2016, 2017, I believe we had a number of customers who were not able to switch off of gas because the oil was not there because of the demand for oil. And that then produced a petition seeking a waiver, because if we tell you to move, or if you're told to move off of gas, you don't move to oil, you're then penalized. Or if there's enough times in certain areas, you're then moved to firm customer. All of that is set up in a way to encourage those who have chosen to sign up for interruptible, or those who can't go and become a firm customer because it's not available, in a movement off of gas when it's called upon. But then they can't necessarily get penalized if they're not able to do that, right? Have we done some projections based on 2016, 2017 when that happened? Now, if I remember correctly, it was about 86 customers, mostly in New York City's area, and mostly a lot of them were hospitals and schools. I'm just wondering if we've done the projections on that, what that means, and working with the folks on that.
Commissioner, the number of actual interruptible customers that don't comply on a year-to-year basis are very small.
Okay.
The concern was automatically switching them to firm service or taking gas service away from them altogether if firm service was not possible. That was, I believe, part of the commission decision last December to Con Edison that they were not going to be able to do that anymore. The commission told them, don't do it anymore. That was the commission order. We currently have 2 sets of tariff filings, one from Con Ed for both of its service territory, and one from each of the grid service territories, which I sincerely hope will be able to report to the commission in the November session, so that we can have some new rules in place by December 1st to try to correct some of those issues that I think you're bringing up.
That's fair. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So there's also talking on, you talked about recent filings made by LDCs in the rate cases that focused on the use of demand response and non-pipe alternatives, including energy efficiency to meet growing demand, and especially in areas where local governments seek to phase out dirtier heating fuels such as fuel oil and propane. How many customers who have, if they don't have available gas and they wanted it, how many customers switch to heating pumps, or how many of them go to propane or other?
I don't have that information at my fingertips, Commissioner.
Okay. The reason I raise it is I think it's really important, especially when we have a focus on heat pumps and the encouragement of moving folks to heat pumps, and that there are a lot of different state actions and state funding that is tied to that. For me, it's about the accountability of those dollars, and also not just looking at the direct dollars that are going to this, but also the education and outreach, and whether or not we are actually doing this and it's not actually helping, and we're spending a lot of dollars and people are still either moving to fuels that are not as clean, or they just don't have, they just choose to either go elsewhere or not make the investments economically that we want, whether it's an upgrade to their business or to their homes or other things that might be helpful. So I think it's something that, is that something that's being looked at in the staff's report? All right, so to be determined, I guess, right?
Yeah, the staff
investigative report was looking at the moratoria in Westchester County and in the downstate grid regions. And, staff was charged with looking at the reasonableness of the utility actions. So I don't believe that there will be much analysis related to customer alternatives in that effort, but certainly could be in future efforts.
Okay, well, I don't want to hold up the release of the report, but I do think it's really important. I will, since we're talking about this, take a moment to say that I am truly concerned about the situation. I'm truly concerned that we've undertaken a investigation on the supply constraints. I think that's important. However, it's done outside of the commission fully understanding, at least this commissioner fully understanding what the processes are, who's been hired, what the RFPs have been, all the different things that I think it's incumbent upon me as at least where I sit, that I would like to have more ability to make sure and flush out the important issues that need to be looked at, to make sure that, like we do when we have management audits and other things where we put out an RFP and then we sign off on who's been hired, making sure that we've looked at it carefully. I just think for me, I think it's problematic that it's a silo. We don't know, all the details, and we don't have anything from a transparent perspective to share with the public. And I think that they have a right to know, and they have a right to also be engaged in it from that way. Some of the things that I think are important also is just looking at, there are lots of discussions on future studies that are going to be done, not only under gas, but the future for energy planning. And, I think it's incumbent upon me to say we need more details, and we also need to be able to know exactly what that process is and how those who may want to be involved in it can be involved, and also what the dollars are and where they're coming from, and not just after the fact. And for me, a lot of the questions that I have, and I'm going to raise these, and if it's part of the study, great. If you have an answer to it now and you could share, that is also helpful to me. What is the short-term carbon impact of the inability to access additional gas? Okay, that's important. For me, we have had a policy, or so it seems, of limiting new natural gas. And really, it seems in many ways to wind up promoting more polluting liquid fuels like diesel. We need to look at that and understand that. If our very reasons for, focusing on no new gas is to have a cleaner environment, and we're actually going backwards, we need to understand that. Also, what's the impact on local air quality? When Mayor Bloomberg undertook the oil to gas conversions in New York City, there was a significant focus on what that meant from a local air quality, projecting out to 2030 if we continued on that. And so, to the extent that we are, needing to look at that, I think it's important. Will this stifle the growth of technologies that use gas efficiently, like CHP or fuel cells, and allow old, inefficient plants to keep running? That's something that I think is important when we're looking at that. What is the carbon impact of converting to heat pumps on Long Island and in Westchester, where most of the power is produced by oil and natural gas-fired power plants? That gets to what we're seeing from an impact perspective, if our dollars are actually helping to not only spur the market, but that the customers benefit from that environmentally, economically, and that they get the fuel that they need. As the constraints on the gas system grow, or dual fuel plants modeled to use oil more often, or some of our energy efficiency or demand response programs, if we are asking them to figure out a way to get by with less, and it winds up being that we're then encouraging or incentivizing more oil usage or other dirtier fuels, that's something we need to consider and be mindful of. And if it's also costing us more, that is concerning. Will folks be hitting their annual emission limits more often or earlier in the year by this? And will there be an opportunity to get waivers from the DEC? We've weighed in on it, polar vortex, we've weighed in on some necessary waivers that may need to happen. That's something that we should be actively looking at and engaging and understanding, so that people are not put in the position of having to not know or to spend resources after the fact. And when we did the petitions for the waiver of those folks in New York City who couldn't move from gas to oil, I think it took about 2 years to wind its way through us. I think it was about 2 years. So it's something that we should consider. I am really glad to know that staff is working diligently with everyone, as you always do every winter. I am really concerned. I'm also concerned about the weight of this for staff and the need for appropriate resources and the need to be able to talk frankly and openly in what some of the challenges are, not just privately, but also more publicly, because I think that helps people understand the situation. I personally am going to be very focused on this, and I want us to come up with solutions that work and figure out how to have the right mix. But I also think people shouldn't, it's not a one technology is the answer, one fuel is the answer. It's a variety, and the most important thing to me is keeping the lights on, and when they go out, getting them back up and running fast, and the cost to the customers. And it's clear from our situation, not only in Westchester, but in Lansing and other places, that there is a disconnect for those folks who want fuel sources and they're not being able to get them, and what that means, and we should be working with all folks on that. So I appreciate this. I appreciate that we're also looking at a snapshot in terms of whether we are set for this winter for current firm customers. And when we say we're set, it doesn't mean that we are not going to incur costs to do that, nor does it mean that we're going to be going backwards environmentally to meet some of the load requirements. And from a system planning perspective, I do agree that we need more longer-term system planning and recognizing what we need. It is no shock that there is a single failure. We're addressing that now, but again, every year there are going to be negative events that are going to stress the system. And what that right balance is really important. And it's not about dealing with it this winter. It's really for all winters. So thanks. That's it.
Thank you. This is an item that doesn't require commission formal action. Obviously, we received a report and had a chance to ask questions. So I'll now move to the third item for discussion, which is item 101, case 19G0678, which is the proceeding to investigate denials of service requests by National Grid, presented by Bob Rosenthal, General Counsel. Cindy McCarron, Deputy Director for Gas and Water, and Mike Reeder, Chief Gas and Water Rates and Supply, are available for questions.
Chair, I do know that some of these issues may wind up requiring some technical assistance from John Sano in particular. I know he's leaving now, but
Do you recommend that we ask him to stay?
a lot of it, for me, a lot of it is tied. A lot of the questions.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
sorry.
Good morning. Let me start by saying that it's an honor to appear before this board, and I look forward to working with you in the future. As you know, the department has been investigating National Grid's decision made with no notice in May 2019 to impose a blanket denial of service to all new customers and what it deemed as, quote, inactive customers. It was around this time that National Grid staff began telling these customers that the company would not provide gas service until the state DEC issued a permit for a downstate pipeline. Later, in the context of the investigation, National Grid asserted that many of the customers denied service were inactive for more than 24 months and that its decision to deny service was justified because the recommencement of service would constitute an increase in demand that the company lacked supply to safely meet. To determine whether National Grid was indeed justified in denying service with no advance notice to certain customers, the department focused on 3 issues. First, we examined the specific circumstances regarding customers denied service, including data on the size and type of customer, which in turn helped staff determine if there were any trends with respect to the denials. Second, we examined whether it was correct for National Grid to create a 24-month filter with respect to determining the status of an existing customer as active or inactive and determine whether or not the associated load was additional or pre-existing. Third, we examined the materiality of the denial of service to each subgroup of customers by estimating the peak demand for each group against the peak load of the system and whether National Grid could meet the needs of each subgroup of customers under its existing peak capacity projections. As far as the circumstances surrounding the service denials, we learned that a number of customers denied service were undertaking renovations of their homes, and that in many cases the renovations had not gone on longer than 24 months. In fact, we learned that 218 customers denied service had been active for less than 24 months. In other circumstances, we learned that National Grid denied service to customers who had simply moved from one residence to another residence within National Grid's service area where the other residence had not been previously occupied for some time. With respect to National Grid's internal 24-month metric, we determined that with a system serving 1.8 million customers, it is inevitable that during any 24-month period, a relatively constant number of customer accounts would be inactive because of lengthy renovations or for other reasons, and that the company's load forecast should have presumed the presence of this customer group. That is, staff does not accept the company's view that the recommencement of service to these existing, albeit inactive customers would automatically mean that they were adding new load to the system. We then identified 1,157 existing residential and small business customers denied service since May 2019, most of whom were denied service due to being deemed inactive for more than 24 months. Many of this group of customers would likely have been offline for renovations, and in staff's view, should have been considered by the company to be existing customers that wouldn't be increasing load. These customers would also be harmed by the denial of service with no notice, given the onset of winter and the basic need to heat their homes or businesses. We determined that the peak gas usage associated with this category of customers, even if considered new load, would be extremely low, representing 0.05% of the peak load associated with National Grid's system. Staff then looked at potential future constraints regarding the company's peak demand forecast, as well as National Grid's plan to address any potential constraints, and concluded that the cumulative amount of load could be accommodated by short-term investments in demand response and energy efficiency. As such, we determined that National Grid could safely connect this subgroup of 1,157 customers without negatively impacting its system. And I just want to make the point that these are customers. A customer can be a residence, it could have 3 or 4 people in it. It could be a business. So that part of the order really is affecting 3, 4, 5,000 people. As for the legal standard, the Commission has broad authority in this area as outlined in the order. And I want to highlight one section in particular, which is Section 66-A sub 1 of the Public Service Law. That provision specifies that even during a supply constraint, and we're not assuming that there was one here, gas utilities must, quote, allocate the available supply of gas in such manner as may be necessary to avoid undue hardship. As explained in the order to show cause, at least with respect to the 1,157 residential and small business customers denied service, the Department believed that National Grid did not implement the moratorium in a manner necessary to avoid undue hardship. The Department determined that National Grid had other options, such as demand response and energy efficiency measures, spot market purchases, and compressed natural gas that it could have relied on to serve certain customers that would request service over a reasonable period of time before a moratorium was imposed. The order to show cause requires the company to explore those alternative supply and demand options. National Grid made the decision to start issuing blanket denials with no notice, and that fact alone caused customer hardship. The company acknowledged as much in its October 15th letter to Chair Rhodes, in stating that, quote, more could have been done to communicate with customers. We agree. Indeed, the company should have given its customers a reasonable period of time, such as 60 days, as Con Ed had done just months before National Grid had acted. Had that been done, those customers undergoing renovations could have explored other options. Many probably could have finished their renovations later in the spring or summer during that 60-day period. Others could have finished the part of the renovations related to gas service alone within that 60-day period. And still others could have installed electric heat pumps. National Grid also could have come to the PSC and worked out an arrangement that prioritized those most in need of gas for heating purposes. But the company did none of these things. While the company has cooperated in the investigation, it became clear with winter approaching, and it was 37 degrees in Albany at least last week one night, that a one-commissioner order was warranted once staff understood the nature of the denials affecting the 1,157 customers and the need to undertake immediate action to address as many customer hardships as possible. Let me finish by saying that the order to show cause is already having a positive effect. With respect to the 1,157 customers, National Grid announced on Monday that it would begin connecting all of those customers immediately. Indeed, National Grid also announced that it could serve these customers safely through the same types of programs that we identified in the order to show cause. And that ends my formal comments, and I'm happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. So at here is the proprietary of decision-making with respect to service requests. And I want to note, sort of as background, kind of the active working of the investigation and the associated report that we've discussed. We mentioned at several points during this session. I note, of course, that there are developments that keep happening in the outside world that keep the issues open and the work ongoing. That said, I, of course, share the public's and the Commission's deep and proper interest in getting the findings of that report out as soon as the work's done and as soon as they're ready. And it's against that context that the one commissioner order exercises the Commission's duty to preserve service for existing customers and to address cases of hardship. And I think I obviously support the one commissioner order, and I believe it took the action in an appropriate and balanced way. And I too want to go on the record as being encouraged by the company's swift and completely resolute response in terms of connecting the 1,157 customers. That is happening, and that's simply put, that's a very good response. Commissioner Berman.
Well, I am interested in what my other commissioners say because I really am concerned about this approach. I don't think the ends justify the means, and I am concerned that saying that it's had a positive effect, I'm not so sure that the one commissioner order was the catalyst for the discussion on the customers being given gas. I think that in fairness, there's was ongoing discussions through the complaint process as happens, and so that information and the evidence on that in what was going to be done or not done and how it would be done in a way that was helpful and showing the regulator, the utilities, and the customers working together, I think may have been something that would have been a better process rather than a one commissioner order that we're now faced with whether we confirm it or not. I do know that it's the chair's discretion, and he made his decision on that, but I would have rather have had the opportunity to have engaged in a way that I think may have helped us have at least more of a fruitful pathway, or at least have had some input in or an understanding of what was going on. I do think that this one commissioner order speaks volumes about the need for us to address the constraint issues and the need for us for, clearly we're hearing loudly that there are a large group of customers who want and need gas, and the opportunities for them to move to other fuels if the gas is not available, or either not feasible at this time or economically more costly and or environmentally more challenging. So altogether we need to look at that, we need to examine it, and rather than being in the crisis mode, we need to address that. I do think that there's been a lot over the years on what the definition of a moratorium is. Sometimes it looks and smells like a moratorium and it's not. And what that means is the answer that get to a moratorium to then push for other solutions other than gas. But what if that doesn't actually help, brings us backwards, and also is still not? What's the framework? So we talked about the fact that National Grid gave no notice. And then it seems like the bar now is Con Ed gave 60-day notice to their customers, so therefore that's the bar. So utilities, you're on notice that it sounds like it's a 60-day window that you have. However, we all know that, John Sano talked about not wanting to alarm folks, right? So what does that mean if you're trying to make decisions and trying to make sure that you're doing the right thing? Frankly, if you're in a gas-constrained area, you should put all your customers on notice that you may not have gas. Is that what we want? Because that then causes more issues. Maybe that's positive because it brings out discussion, but not if then we're going to chill the conversation. I frankly have to bristle at saying no notice because the commission has had notice. The commission has been engaged. The commission has, goes back. I go back and look from my perspective. I've raised this every year, several times, not just in the planning stage, not just in the, one particular item, but throughout. And we've had, during the polar vortex, we had a conference after the polar vortex, 2014. It's loaded with people talking about the constraint issues, the need for new infrastructure, and actually many times it was the commissioners themselves talking about that would be a positive, and that we anticipated, and frankly some of our planning has been done in a way that publicly has said that there's no worries because we are looking at that and we are hopeful with the new infrastructure as alleviating that, so we can't say that there's an issue. So for me, I do think customers need notice, and they need appropriate notice, and we need to work within what that framework is, maybe have a collaborative with the utilities on what that means so we're all on the same page, and go through what that means, what that looks like, which customers get what notice, how they get that notice, when they get that notice. Now, that's going to take a lot of time. If the solution is we're doing all this because we have gas constraint issues, and our obligation is to make sure that customers have their energy, then why aren't we figuring out? It almost speaks like it meets all the criteria. There's safety issues if we don't have new infrastructure. There's reliability issues if we don't have new infrastructure. There's environmental impacts that go backwards if we don't have new infrastructure. There's economic issues if we don't have it. And by the way, customer choice is not there because they're not being able to get what they ask for when they want it. And so is the gas planning, is the electric planning, is all of this just, us just not addressing the elephants in the room? We need to have those conversations and we need to work through that. And frankly, I am very supportive of looking for ways to incorporate demand response, looking for ways to incorporate energy efficiency, looking for ways to increase the impact of heat pumps. But it's not a be-all and end-all. And those people who are saying that no pipelines, get rid of them, we don't want them, are actually need to take a hard look at what the ramifications are and work through those with people, because there is a pathway for a lot of things to be there. And I just want to be very clear that so no one can say that I was not clear in where I stood and where I see it. For me, the most important thing is maintaining the reliability and resiliency of the grid and doing it in a responsible way. Reducing carbon emissions is very important. And the use of natural gas, both through direct use and for power generation, can be a very impactful way for the state to lower their emissions profile. As we sit here today, we're looking at, in order to show cause, because there are customers who said they want gas and they weren't able to get it, and we are challenging the utility to say, in some ways, I don't understand it. Why are we making it that we're not working with them when we can't say that it's for their failure alone. It's a combination of our own policy and state policy actions and the failure for us to make some very bold and courageous things that need to be done. And I'm very, very concerned because, listen, it's easy to hate the utility. It's easy to blame. but we have to figure out the pathway forward. And so to say that John Bruckner in his letter said that there could have been better communication. I think that is true, and we could examine what that is. But then I say, well, the minute that was done, the minute the first complaint was done, if we felt that under the public service law they didn't have the right to do this, and that there was this lack of direct notice was a problem, and they needed to go to the Con Ed 60-day solution, well then for me, why didn't we say something then? Why didn't we put out a statement that no, or say directly to them? So for me, the process is something that is very difficult for me to handle because it doesn't show the right pathway. And if you're sitting there trying to make decisions, you want to know what the right pathway is. Every utility is wanting their customers to be happy customers. Every utility wants to solve the issues. And when there are clunkiness and there are problems with that, we need to address that. We take care of that usually through working through how well they did, what their customer satisfaction is, and what some of the things are. For me, I've seen too many times where when we have a lot of complaints that come in that maybe fit in this global way, we don't address it. We say it's each complaint, we're addressing them singly. I raised it at last session about, when we had the URAC petition and we were denying it. They were asking for some relief for global complaints being looked at. We have another one that we're denying, another URAC one. And whether or not it fits substantively on whether that rises to the level of a global complaint, we do need to work through what this means. The signal that we're saying to people is if you want to get your service, file as many complaints as you want and be very loud. What does that mean? So Lansing has a moratorium since 2015. Is it because, what? Is there a distinction between Lansing and their needs? Now, we have a proceeding. We are looking at that, but it hasn't come back before us to look at. Does it take people just saying we're not going to work within the framework? We're going to be angry and we're going to demand action, and that's what bubbles it up? What's the pathway? In a sense, we're also acknowledging the need for gas. We're acknowledging the need that customers have a right to demand whatever it is, whether it's gas, whether it's electric, whether it's heat pumps, that customers have the right to demand what they want. I'm going to listen to some of what my commissioners say.
Is mass extinction? Do they have a right to demand that?
What we're going to... I'm going to wait and listen to what my other commissioners say, and I am going to come back to this with some thoughts because I really am trying to struggle. I am not sitting here and saying that I think we shouldn't review this. What I am concerned about is that what we've set up is a situation where it is not helping, and it only is causing more disruption. And I did welcome the letter before we voted on the confirming order. I welcome it because it also showed that it's not as clear-cut. The order doesn't really have much in the way of what the staff investigation found, and it's in many ways it almost seems like it's a predetermination of the staff report to come, which I don't think it was intended to be, but it makes it confusing. We have another item on here that was added, 166, that was added that is saying that we're suspending the tariff filings. That was part of John Bruckner's letter. And that we're saying that these filings are part and parcel to the Department of Public Service staff's ongoing investigation and will allow time for staff to complete its supply constraint analysis and further investigation of National Grid service denial. Staff is also reviewing moratorium best practices to avoid customer hardships. No resolution is anticipated before the effective date of the tariff amendments. Therefore, the Commission directs that the filing be suspended through and including February 28, 2020. My concern was that also showcases that it's not as clear-cut to say it's all on the utility for their failure, because it's showing. We opened a investigation that then has gotten several times more encumbered, and we opened the investigation looking at the supply constraints. There are several specific issues that need to be looked at, and then there are several issues in terms from factually, but also from the supply constraint issue. To say that we're not saying that there is a supply constraint issue, is that area not constrained? Am I wrong on that? Now, we can talk about how we challenge it, but to say that that's not a supply constraint area is something that I would be very confused by. There are other areas that are constrained as well. Maybe we need to be more open about those and what that means and what the process is. And also then look at, is it, once it goes, we don't then go back to try to alleviate that moratorium other than through non-pipes alternatives? Those are questions I have, because those are real answers. And then is it that you should just not tell your customers that we can't serve you? We can just say we're just waiting? We're waiting. What is the definition of the moratorium? Is there a certain, if I say I want gas, I file whatever application it is, what's the timeline to get it? There's a waiting list in Westchester. People should be going on more to be formally recognized. But what's the waiting list? Because if we're eventually going to serve them with some gas, let's make some analysis on what that is. If the analysis is that everyone on that list is going to be looked at and we hope to have 10% of those going on to heat pumps, then we know it's 10%. We can make some economic decisions based on that. We could look at that. We could see who voluntarily wants that. But if 90% or 100% are going to wind up, if they wait to get gas, then why are we waiting? If that's the decision, what does that mean from an infrastructure, especially if we're hearing that energy prices are as low as they are? Why wouldn't we be taking advantage of that now? Just want to know what it is, because those are the decisions, those are the investment decisions that customers need to decide, that utilities need to decide, and all those other folks that weigh into that. It's just economically appropriate, and to me, it's also, if we're saying that we need to notify, let's drill down on what we're notifying them on and what our responsibility is. I don't believe that the order to show cause is what triggered them to say that they were going to be connecting customers immediately. I think that that was already in discussion. And I think that they recognized and reacted to it in saying that. That's something that I think is important for us, because I don't think then, if that's the case, then we're setting up a scenario where we are bringing orders to show causes in a way that doesn't make sense. So I think that it's fair to say that there were ongoing discussions with the complaint process about how they were going to deal with this and what they could do. Plus, to the extent that we are asking them to do things, from an energy efficiency and a demand response way and other alternatives, we need to be very clear about what that's going to cost, and we need to be very clear about what that means environmentally. Because I do think that some of the ways that they're now going to have to meet that is likely going to be environmentally harmful or not as environmentally friendly as it could have been, and will also be costly. And that's something that I want to have more clear understanding of. I don't want to see protracted engagement in a way that is not helpful to the customers. We're addressing right now some customers, but all customers need to know where they stand and what that means for our perspective. And I do think it is important that we work through what the processes are. If you're filing a complaint, what the expected timeline is for resolution. If it goes from you get one complaint and then there's 500 complaints, but 1,000 complaints, 3,000 complaints, whatever that is, what triggers it for more of a taking it out of that process and bringing it to us? Because under the complaint process, there are also rules and processes for appeal on both the utility side and the customer side. And so right now it's very clunky to me on, are we going to also go and handle everything on a complaint by complaint process? Are we doing this all in the order to show cause? Just want to understand it. I just want folks to have reliable energy service, and I want to do it in a way that's affordable and helps in our environmental policy goals. That's it. And I'm really concerned.
So, Commissioner Berman, with all due respect, can we just go once through the commissioners for comments so that if you have further thoughts? Okay, great. Well, that's okay. Thank you very much. Commissioner Lisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, there's no doubt that this has captured the attention of quite a few people. We've seen this 1,147 customers that is bolstering this case time and time again in the news. And it is tempting then to look at Grid's assertion that they can't service new customers because they just don't have the capacity. That to be determined, I guess, because as we just listened to a report earlier, we're in an environment where the marketplace has been fairly stable for 5 years, and yet resources are unpredictable because allegedly there needs to be another pipeline. But I would simply say this. For me to cast a vote on this issue, I have to say I'm not voting on a pipeline. I want to be very clear about that. That issue still rests on the desks, perhaps other places as well, but at least New York and New Jersey both have to come together in their environmental committees before we have a chance to even talk about that. The issue's there, but what's before us here is simply this. In order to show cause, and there are 4 items that I'm going to be voting on today. And the reason I'm making it clear is because I'm not taking a position on anything other than those 4 items. One is demand that they reinstall those pre-existing customers. The other is a contingency plan, an implementation plan, and finally, if penalties are due, that should be included in the efforts that will be ongoing from this point. But that is what I'm voting on today. I am not voting on anything other than that. So I do have a very broad view on the whole issue of resources, how they should be delivered and distributed. That's not on our table today. So I will be supporting this in the context that I just described.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Edwards.
So, Chair, I just want to thank you for issuing this one commission order. I wish I could have done it, quite frankly. I started asking could I have done this without your permission? And I was
What was
told,
the answer?
I was told, no, I could not have done that. You know, I've been really troubled by this, as many of you know. And I'm still troubled by it. The National Grid leadership acknowledged that they had poor communication to customers, but they believe that they have been transparent and that the final report on capacity, when released, will vindicate the company. So I want to be very clear. Everyone lost with this. There is no vindication if there is when this report comes out. So I am hoping that National Grid does not take the fact that we have capacity issues and start saying, I told you so. Because and I'm speaking for myself, I believe that this was an intentional, chaotic, confusion pipeline approval strategy that impacted their customers who depend on reliability. And that's where I come down on this. I went to their website to see what it is that they were telling customers. And this came up. And it says, we cannot process applications for new and expanded gas service in Brooklyn, Queens, and Long Island until we receive state and federal approval for the NESE project. You may still submit in the meantime, and we remain cautiously optimistic that the NESE project will proceed on schedule and be in service by the winter of 2020-2021. They did not ask for my address. I was not directed anywhere. They didn't know if I had a renovation, nothing. And when I raised the issue about this, all of a sudden this disappeared. Okay? Now, could be a coincidence, maybe not. There was no transparent communication. I do not think that we own this particular issue. I think it lies squarely with their chaotic and intentional, confusing strategy. Yes, we absolutely, with all the things that I have seen, we have capacity issues. But what I want to know is how big are they? Where's the line in the sand? Is it this year? Is it next year? Where was the plan B? Because even if approved, we would still have issues today. I read, you know, sometimes you have to watch people when they don't think you're paying attention. So I went back to all of their annual reports. I read all their annual reports, all of them. And this was not mentioned. They identified top-down, bottom-up risk assessments. And when I asked why this was not included in there, what I received back is that while National Grid has included operational risk factors in its annual report to shareholders, we have not specifically addressed the current issue. Okay, so why not? I find that odd. If we have a customer in an apartment where the building provides heat and hot water. This is a real customer. This customer was denied service for residential, non-heating, for cooking purposes. The apartment had pre-existing non-heating customer. There was no new load, but they were denied. When that person called the PSC, they were then put back on. But what about the other people on the floor in that apartment building that do not know to call the PSC? They are not aware of it. What about them? What about the most vulnerable customers that have no idea about all of this? What about them? What about the renovations? You go and you put your hard-earned money to try to improve your home, and you think that you're going to have reliable service, and you don't. What about the small business customers that have saved up to open up a business, to be entrepreneurs, and then they can't open up because they can't have any guests? This is beyond whether there's a capacity issue or not. This is absolutely unacceptable. So we can go back and forth with what they communicated to the staff, what they did not communicate to the staff. We're going to get through all that. I believe that there's a capacity issue. I do. But I also have to trust the messenger to say, what is it that has to be done? What do we need to do? Are there short-term things that we can do? Do we need the pipeline? Can we survive without it? What are those other things? But you have to have somebody that you trust across the table so that you can believe what it is that they're saying. And right now, I just don't. I think that this was just, it was mean. It was put all the customers in the middle and put as much pressure on everybody in order to get this done. And that's not what, I didn't sign up for this. And I'm sure none of you did either. We will get to whether we have, how big our capacity issues are. We will get there. I am sure we will get there. But doing this and flipping a switch to say, nah, I'm going to close, and my grandchildren used to hold their breath. And that didn't work either. Didn't work either. So, you know, I'm confident that this team will figure out what the capacities are, what it's not. I don't like the pipeline issues either. I just don't. Do we need it? I have no idea. And we're going to have to solve that one way or the other, either a long-term or a short-term. We're going to have to get to the point where we're being more environmentally. Do we need this as a short-term solution? I don't know. I really don't know. But this was unacceptable. We could have sat around the table and figured this out and made and someone, to your point, Commissioner, someone else is going to make the hard decision on whether we absolutely need that. But this, to me, was chaotic. It was confusing. It was mean. And I don't think it was necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard.
When I joined the commission in July, I must admit I had great sympathy for the company's position regarding capacity shortages.
Can we hear John, or do we?
Okay, sorry. I'll start again. When I joined the commission in July, I must admit that I had a high degree of sympathy for the company's position on the issue of capacity shortages and their impacts on customers. However, since that time, the company's behavior and public relations strategy has changed my opinion. Rather than comprehensively reaching out to regulators, customers, both current and prospective, to engage in meaningful short-term solutions to mitigate impacts, the company poured large amounts of resource into a lobbying effort to influence a regulatory proceeding. This behavior greatly fueled public distrust, leaving customers and the broader community not believing grid statements on its supply resources. This waste of time and resource could clearly have been much better used by focusing with dealing with the problem at hand. Additionally, this case points out to the enormous challenges our state faces in fundamentally changing our energy systems. The new goals that we've all adopted, I believe, are essential and extraordinary. However, we must engage all levels of our society so these early missteps, which only produce skepticism and can set us back years to meeting our ultimate goals, are addressed. We need to keep a close eye, not only on the engineering and technical challenges ahead meaning in the very near term, the medium term, and the longer term, but as importantly, we will have to deal with the societal implications of our actions and what they will produce. Because clearly, the short-term customer reaction to not having adequate gas supply was, we want more gas. And that is an undeniable fact on almost every level, whether public officials, business leaders, or residential consumers themselves. So while I strongly support this order and the action that we have taken today, I do need to believe that we need to address a broader level of all members of the state's population on how the goals that have been set will be achieved and what disruptions and public and changes in behavior will be necessary to meet them. Because right now, as long as we go down this road of brinksmanship and public relations and intensive lobbying, we are going to not get where we want to go. And if we do, it'll be much more difficult, and we will leave many angry and left out people in our wake. So I will be supporting this order.
So thank you. I'd like to proceed to call for a vote. I want to observe that comments have ranged broadly and have talked about the broader context, and that's an important discussion. But right now we're talking about this specific item, which is this order.
For clarification from council.
Please go ahead.
Just want to clarify for the record, part of the trouble with the orders to show causes is that it is not necessarily saying that a company has done something, but it is putting it out there for then the company to respond. So there's been a lot of conversation here seeming to lead towards a resolution or a vote on what the company has or has not done. And orders to show causes aren't supposed to be set up, even though once you put it out there, it then makes it fact. Staff put forward a very put forward an order with a lot of questions in terms of that based on staff investigation, which apparently is still ongoing. We have not really made a decision then as the commission on that, though, and so I just want to be clear on what exactly is being done, because it seems like we're condemning the company, and yet we're telling them, don't worry, you have an opportunity to respond. So I just want to clarify on what we're saying.
I think that the ordering clause 1 through 4, which is on pages 7 and 8, make very clear what we're doing here, which is traditional usage of the order to show cause procedure, in which we order the company to immediately take an action or show cause why they can't. With respect to the 1157, they obviously have decided to take that immediate action. We've also asked them to provide 2 types of plans to address the additional customers that were denied service, and they are given the opportunity to show cause why they cannot do that as well. And the 4th item is a penalty action, which shows cause why penalties here are appropriate, and it provides the company with the option of showing cause why they are not.
Okay, thanks. And in the order itself, we also call upon other utilities to take note of the issues and to plan accordingly.
I mean, that's correct as far as the contingencies go.
Right.
So with that, I'd like to call for a vote. My own vote is understandably in favor of the recommendation to confirm the one commissioner order issued by me on October 11, 2019 as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
No.
Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards, how do you vote?
Yes, and thank you again.
Commissioner Howard, how do you vote?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items on the consent agenda? Commissioner Berman?
I'm voting no on item 166 for the reasons that I laid out before. I do think that to the extent that this ties into the very issues that we're bringing an order to show cause against a company, I think it is problematic. It is for us part of the actions that we're not taking is we have not yet fully addressed the staff investigation, fully addressed whatever consultants' investigations, and given clear guidance and signals. And I think it's really important when we look at this that we also lay out the real, framework in terms of what proper notice is, what a moratorium is, some of the very things that the order speaks to that we're going to do, but yet we punted back to February of 2020, and that for me is concerning, and we should be really looking at that and addressing it because the staff investigation may actually lend support to the company or not. And we shouldn't prejudge it, and so we should have that full framework to understand it. And that may also explain or not where the company was coming from and also the engagement that they did or did not with staff and other stakeholders. And I think it's really important that we look at that to the extent that it also now tees up a very negative situation for staff who, based on some investigation or some aspects of the investigation leading to the order to show cause and then being asked now to finalize a report. I really want to caution you that it's important that you remain independent and also that you remain true to the four corners of the report and not try to shape it to fit the narrative that may be now out there. And it's really I think we need to make sure that we take a hard look at that so that no one could cast aspersions on the hard work of staff, and that's important to me. So, Item 262. Which is National Grid's its adjustment for the authorization to adjust the annual calculation of discount amounts. This is a important item. It deals with the low-income community and the discounts, and I really do want to thank staff as well as the company in working on this issue because it tries to correct a situation with the low-income discounts and making sure that we're not harming the customers, and it was brought forward to us by the company in good faith to address that issue. I do want to note that the order, and I'm going to be voting in favor of this as a concurrence, though, because the order language is a little concerning to me because it talks about providing a reasonable glide path to transition low-income customers to the appropriate discount level. The proposed 20% limit provides an adequate boundary to potential annual discount rate decreases. This limitation on the reduction in discount levels provides vulnerable customers time to adapt to new discount levels and mitigates the negative effects that large drops in discount levels would have on those customers. And then further on another page it says, any changes to the calculation methodology of the billed discount levels should be addressed in the generic low-income proceeding, which I didn't know was still ongoing. So I flag these two because that's a lot of information, and while we're addressing it right now, it is something from a note, if we're talking about notice, the notice perspective that there is this transition where people will see need to be prepared for and what we're doing, and if we're going to be addressing it in the low-income generic proceeding, we should have conversations on what that looks like, because, you know, it's different for those folks who are financially able, but for many, that glide path, no matter how long the transition, is just not going to be there, and I think we need to recognize that. On sorry, my numbers are wrong. On item 263, this is an ESCO matter. There are no customers, and it's cleaning up as we do others when they don't comply, but they don't really technically exist, and so we're getting rid of them. So I'm going to be voting in favor of that, but I still will raise the issue that there's still the outstanding ESCO issues that are out there that we need to address. On item 264, with the cybersecurity protocols and protections in the energy marketplace, I'm going to be voting in concurrence with this, but I just want to raise some concerns I have with the order in a public way. There are sections of the order that talks about the fact that folks were unhappy with the collaborative process. And it wasn't just one person, it was several people. And that, what we say in the order is that, excuse me. Several parties expressed dissatisfaction with the collaborative process, which led up to the filing of the present petition. But then we go on to basically tell them that the collaborative process led up to this rulemaking. So it served as a valuable tool which allowed stakeholders to discuss and develop these issues in real time prior to being proposed to the Commission for approval. That's true. The collaborative process that led to the current petition before the Commission is not determinative of the Commission's decision in this order, and any party that believes it was not able to participate effectively in the collaborative process was able to submit comments in response to the SAPA notice. That falls flat for me. And I understand that the collaborative process is not before us from a substantive perspective. But if we have a lot of people who have raised issues and we basically in an order say to them, thank you for telling us that the collaborative process, at least as you saw it, was less than ideal, it's fine because we SAP'd it, so you could have filed your comments. The collaborative processes, especially as we move forward with a lot of opportunities for collaboratives, it's really important that we hear all voices and figure out how to do it in a way that helps to move the conversation. I understand that some of these folks may have been unhappy no matter what, but some of them may have been able to have engaged in a way. Our collaborative processes, maybe we just need to take a look at what that means, what the expectations are, and help to, if there's a way of making it better, do that, because we don't want people to feel like the collaborative process was a waste of their time. And that goes for staff as well. And staff has usually been extremely good about helping to make collaboratives, add value if we're engaged in the right way. And I want staff to have that opportunity to do that. And so it may be something for us to take a look at. What were some of the failings? How could it have been done better? There's also, and I just want to note, there's also in this order a number of things that are related to the fact that part of the reason that we need to move this order is to get to the green button connect. I think there was a filing yesterday by some folks, including the joint utilities, who said that they were waiting for decision points in this to be able to engage further in the green button connect. I think that's a fair assessment, but to the extent that we also keep in mind that we don't start sort of anew, but to the extent that we incorporate some of the concerns and the criticisms from here into that Green Button Connect collaborative, I think it's really important that we do that in a helpful way. I also think it's important from a cybersecurity perspective that we look at making sure that everyone has the tools and the flexibility. I do like the fact that we're moving to more of a risk-based approach. I think that works, but that we have to be open to alternatives. In here, we seem to give a significant nod to state entities who say that they don't want to follow certain processes because they have alternatives that seem to meet the test through the cybersecurity protocols that the states do, and recognizing the difficulty if they were to have to sign some of these. And so to the extent there may be other opportunities for some effective and still as good alternatives that may be followed depending on certain makeups of the entities that the utilities are engaged in, we should be looking at least engaging in that, and maybe that's part of the discussion for the Green Button Connect. So I raised that issue. 265 is the URAC petition. I do agree that this didn't rise to the level of a global complaint, but I do just raise what I raised last session, and then what I raised earlier is we do need to look at how we are handling the complaint processes, how we are doing some analysis. I know staff is engaged on that. I have every expectation that they'll continue to be, and any process improvements that we can do, especially because we've seen from the situation with folks wanting access to getting gas service. There are other significant issues that do come, and to the extent that it's not left to that one complainer having to have several people to raise it. If we see that there's a problem, we should try to address it, but have the right processes in place so that it doesn't seem like a bait and switch for anyone, and also that we have the right appeals process and maybe some more engagement in terms of fixing some situations. And that's it. Thanks. Sorry.
I'm sorry, maybe I just check for the recap, and maybe on your behalf, Kate. I believe you voted no on 166, but on the others you were concurring or yes. Is that correct?
Concurring on 262 and 264? Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisi.
Nothing, thank you.
Commissioner Edwards.
I have nothing.
Commissioner Howard.
Yeah, I will be supporting this consent agenda. However, I do need to make a comment on several of the items dealing with street lighting sales. We have seen there's several items on this month's agenda regarding the purchase of street lighting assets of investor-owned utilities by municipalities. I strongly applaud the goals of these initiatives: rapid conversion of street lights fixtures to LEDs, resulting in huge sustainable energy savings and savings to the municipal budgets. However, as an observer of local governments close to 40 years, I have concerns that adding additional infrastructure responsibilities to municipalities who face periodic fiscal issues might, over time, place the street lighting systems in the same situations that many water and wastewater systems are currently in due to lack of adequate long-term funding and unable to keep these systems in good shape. The short-term goals are excellent. My only hope is that they are sustained over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I call for a vote. My own vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I vote yes, except how I shared
Except as
earlier.
noted. Thank you. Commissioner Lisi?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Secretary Burgess, is there anything further to come before us today?
There's nothing further to come before you today.
But that's where you're wrong. Well, those good for you. So we've talked at various points today about the hard work of the staff and the integrity of the staff, and that's all true, very true. But it's especially true in the case of this one extraordinary public servant, Kate Burgess, who's leaving us. But she's not done yet because, she's still got some service miles in front of her. And so she's going off to lead the Ignatian Volunteer Corps, which is an organization that does great work and obviously has a special place in your heart. So that's really great. It's also really great that Michelle Phillips, who's in the back row, is going to be taking over and will be our secretary for the commission starting very shortly. But this special colleague deserves some special recognition. And we have, in your case, Kate, a citation by the governor. And because it's the right thing to do, I'm going to read every special word of it. Okay? Right. This may hurt, but you just
Thank you.
Sit there, please, and absorb it. Whereas the citizens of New York are its greatest resource, and we welcome the opportunity to pay tribute to exceptional individuals whose lives and achievements have had a significant impact on others, both personal and professionally. In particular, the Empire State is proud to bestow official commendation upon those who have served their fellow New Yorkers with dedication and excellence. Whereas it is therefore appropriate to recognize the Honorable Kathleen H. Burgess, whose distinguished efforts and invaluable contributions as Secretary of the New York State Public Service Commission will be remembered and deeply appreciated as she leaves the department and the commission where she has served for over 19 years, and whereas Kathleen Burgess graduated from the College of the Holy Cross in 1979 with a BA in Urban Studies. In 1983, she graduated from St. John's School of Law in Queens with a JD, and most recently she earned an MA degree in Pastoral Studies at St. Bernard School of Theology. From this exceptional education, Kathleen has amassed a wealth of experience and expertise, including in the energy and utility sectors. She began her New York State service as a legislative coordinator in August of 1985, then becoming an assistant counsel and joining the Department of Public Service, that's us, in November of 1993 with a focus on communications and cable issues. And whereas in 2007, Kathleen Burgess became an associate counsel at the Commission on Public Integrity with an emphasis on ethics, and she brought her ethics training back to the Department of Public Service in 2011, returning as an assistant counsel and ethics officer. She was promoted to Secretary of the Public Service Commission on July 2013 and has also served as the department's ethics officer and as Secretary of the New York State on Electric Generation Siting and the Environment. Secretary Burgess has since presided over 78 commission sessions, I hope you weren't counting, and over 1,400 ethics reviews, thereby effecting great change with the careful consideration and utmost professionalism and integrity that she has exhibited throughout her distinguished career and state service. And whereas Secretary Burgess generously shares her wisdom, insight, and good counsel with department employees and colleagues, as well she has been a lifelong humanitarian volunteer and mentor, tirelessly apportioning her energy and intellect on charitable endeavors, from the Jesuit Volunteer Corps to the Ignatian Volunteer Corps of New England. Her vision and leadership has been of the highest quality, and she has earned the admiration and respect of the Department of Public Service and the Public Service Commission, as well as the regulated community and all the various stakeholders who participate in department proceedings. And whereas Kathleen Burgess has rendered faithful and conscientious service to the people of New York, helping to improve their quality of life, protecting their safety and well-being, and building a stronger Empire State, this has earned her the gratitude of all who have had the good fortune to know her and work with her. Kathleen's husband, Michael, her children, Joseph and Catherine, and her extended family, friends, and colleagues gather to honor and celebrate the highlights of her extraordinary accomplishments thus far on behalf of all New Yorkers. I am pleased to join in acknowledgement of her remarkable and successful tenure at the Public Service Commission. Now, therefore, I, Andrew M. Cuomo, Governor of the State of New York, do hereby confer this special citation upon the Honorable Kathleen Hughes Burgess with gratitude and best wishes for every continued success in your future endeavors. Signed, Andrew Cuomo, Governor, today.
Thank you. I'm very humbled. I'm very blessed. I will say it's been a great privilege to work for this department. It's been a special privilege to have served as secretary. I thank Gary Brown initially, who entrusted me with this responsibility, because I do think it's a tremendous responsibility to have this position, and to Chair Zibelman, to Greg Sayre, and to Chair Rose for allowing me to continue this. And thank you to each of you, because this job is a team effort, and it's been a pleasure to be part of this team. So thank you, and thank you, and thank you, Governor Cuomo. Thank you.
So now, on that high note, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.